It's really a privilege to, from time to time, accompany my dear friend Celeste on her sojourn and her journey these past 10 years. And to bring her to this gathering today and to have such a wonderful experience and to see all of you gathered here. I've known Celeste for over 30 years, since we met at a peace group that was being formed in our church in Philadelphia. I recall that we sat in a circle, we went around the room, and about 25 people introduced themselves as to who they were and where they came from, and 3/4 of them lived in Celeste's block. So Celeste has always been an organizer. Later, our children were good friends, and we've just remained very close. Whenever I've come to these kinds of events with Celeste, there are two things that profoundly affect me. One of them is the energy that Celeste brings to these events, and the energy that you all give to her in your response. And the other is her clarity of vision. No matter how dark things may be, and what we're reading in the newspapers or hearing about and what is going on, Celeste can always cut through all of the extra decoration and get to the heart of it. And for all of that, I'm very happy to present my good friend Celeste Zappala.
Thank you, Julie. And thanks to each of you for being here today. I'm really grateful to be with you, to be here in this place, because it is a solemn day, and we're joined in heart and spirit with people in our country and beyond who mourn the loss of those killed on September 11, 2001, and for all who have died in the wars fought in the name of that day. Each of us knows where we were, what we felt, and what we feared in the moments as the planes crashed and the TV reports began to take over daily life like a malignant fog. I recall sitting in my church that night, sick with grief, and thinking I was glad that my mother did not live to see that day. She, who had lived through 2 wars, I felt should never have to live to see another. And I also knew that I expected that I would know someone killed there because it's so close. And that night at church, we all prayed for the rumored missing friends and relatives of our congregation, besieging God for favor, for restoration, for strength, for blessing, for a refuge from the fear. Within hours, we learned that friends of our church, John and Ruth Sigmund's daughter, Johanna, was one of the dead. She was the same age as my kids. She had been in play groups with them, and I mostly remembered her as a lively little kid. She was in training for a marathon that year, and she worked in the first tower. And even though she didn't feel very well that day, she went to work anyway. Hundreds of people attended her memorial, only able to view her running shoes and pictures of a vibrant and beautiful young woman. A fund was established in her name at St. Malachi School in North Philadelphia to help kids go to school. But think of all that Johanna and all those thousands of people could have done in the world had they lived. We all live so close to those attacks, I bet you that most of you are connected in some way to somebody who died there or suffered there because of it. And I imagine that today you may well hold somebody in your heart who was precious to you. For me, one of the deepest gnawing fears then was that the lives that I had envisioned for my 3 sons would never be fulfilled. My son Sherwood Baker was in the Pennsylvania National Guard. And deep in my soul, I faced an icy premonition that somehow the events of the day would take him from me. Now, some of you may know our story, have heard us before. My son was a member of the Pennsylvania Guard, which was an odd choice for a young man who came from a peace activist family. He joined our family when he was 13 months old. He was an abandoned baby. He and my other 2 kids were raised at the First United Methodist Church of Germantown, where we prayed and worked for social justice, and the kids were never allowed to have a toy gun and never allowed to play war games, and I always discouraged them from hitting back. Sherwood became a social worker, a nursery school teacher. He married, he had a son, and then in 1997 he said he wanted to join the National Guard. He had met other guardsmen while they were sandbagging the Schuylkill in the flood of '97, and he liked them. They were good guys. They were engaged, helpful, the kind of people you can turn to in times of trouble. That's who the Guard has been. He wanted to be helpful, and to my fear, he would say, "Mom, don't worry, the National Guard never goes to foreign wars. The only thing they do is protect the homeland and work in disasters. And Mom, nobody in the Pennsylvania Guard has been killed in combat since 1945. The assaults of 9/11 did change everything. As the landscape of revenge and invasion took shape, Sherwood told us his unit was on alert. Rumors of war filled our conversations. Sherwood, a person who championed neglected people, had an acute sense of justice. And once the invasion of Iraq occurred, Sher was in an exceedingly painful position. We, his family, were protesting regularly, and he was not fooled by the lies of the administration and faced deployment. And he said to us, "I made an oath before God to do my duty. I'll just go and I'll bring myself and my men home safely. I can't think about the politics of this. I just have to keep my focus." He kissed our tearful faces and left us on March the 8th, 2004. He was assigned to guard the Iraq Survey Group. They were the people who were searching for the non-existent weapons of mass destruction in the spring of 2004. On the early morning of April the 26th, he died in the arms of his friend following an explosion. He was 30 years old. He became the first Pennsylvania Guardsman to be killed in combat since 1945. At Sher's memorial, we sang, "This is my song, O God of all the nations, a song of peace for lands afar and mine. Here are my hopes, my dreams, my sacred shrine, but other hearts in other lands are beating with hopes and dreams as true and high as mine." At his grave, my family and I vowed to speak the truth for him about the great betrayal called the war in Iraq. We're one family. It's one story. I have never understood why our country chose to invade Iraq. We have learned irrefutably that the invasion was a desired event in search of a reason, and 9/11 gave the administration the reason they were looking for. And also, I really think it's incumbent on us to remember that war doesn't start on one particular day. The world changed for all of us on 9/11, but in Afghanistan, the war had been going on for decades, in this century and in the last. If you look at history, you find that the Pashtun tribes became an entity, a political entity called Afghanistan in the 18th century. And that the Russians, the Russian Empire and the British Empire were battling back and forth in what they called the Great Game. A game of terrible war that is going on yet still. Once I visited Westminster Abbey, and deep inside that cathedral I found a monument to the 16,000 souls lost in January of 1842 during 13 days in the mountain passes between Kabul and Jalalabad. Only one British soldier survived, and there's absolutely no mention of how many Afghans were killed. I was sickened, but making my way outside of the cathedral, I came to a courtyard and there were wreaths laid out for the recently fallen British soldiers killed in the war in Afghanistan when they were there. It made my heart break. Will we never learn? When will we be different? Whoever wins in the great game of blood and treasure and lost hope? America has for too long accepted the idea that Afghanistan is a good war, a fair retribution for destruction of 9/11. One can look through the eyes of an Afghan child and wonder what price he must pay for that vengeance. What price has his mother and his grandfather been paying in lifetimes of war? One can look in a mirror and ask ourselves, how is it we have spent 10 years and $1 trillion to wage a war no one can adequately explain or predict its end? And I do want to tell you, I'm not one to believe in conspiracy theories, and I'm not unaware that danger exists in the world. Vigilance is necessary. Monitor our borders. We find rogue nuclear materials. We can anticipate plots against us because there are people who would mean to harm us. And I honor the courage of people who make the commitments to do those jobs. I honor the first responders, the National Guardsmen, and people throughout our nation whose job it is to protect us. When you look at a vet, remember that they took an oath, not only to uphold the Constitution, but to protect our lives. And I honor them for that. But I refuse to be a nationalist. I will not be a jingoist. If only a third of the money that we spent in these last decade on war had been used to improve the health and lives of the world's poor, do you not think the world would be a safer place today? A very conservative friend of mine, who I have dialogues with, says, there's no logic in war. To find its motivation, you have to look to see who benefits from its continuation. Doing so, it's unlikely that we'll find any high moral purposes. It's more likely that they find a substantial source of campaign contributions and election support for our elected representatives to feed their appetite for power and wealth. My friend and I don't always agree a lot, but on this we're both sure. There are some people who profit mightily from the state of perpetual war. They are the vendors of fear. And as much as any terrorist, they are the enemies of peace. And I believe Guys, I believe that with my heart that apathy is yet the greatest enemy of peace that we must conquer. One of the things I mourn for is the path not taken. And remember in the days that followed 9/11, when the entire world mourned with us, when capitals across Europe and Asia and Africa held vigils and placed candles at our embassies, when citizens of all faiths recognized that a great injustice had occurred to innocent people, the call in those days was not for vengeance. It was for peace to be found. What's happened to that prayer? Where is the prayer of peace in an us versus them mentality? We're now 10 years past the day. The events that have unfolded could not have been imagined on that day. War in Afghanistan has now killed 1,762 Americans, and God help us, 50 were injured last night. And maybe 20,000 or more Afghans have been killed. And remember that some of the dead were just young children on September 11, 2001. The inexplicable and inexcusable war in Iraq has taken 4,474 U.S. soldiers, broken the bodies and spirits of thousands more, disrupted families, bankrupted our economy. The toll in Iraq is nothing short of all-out disaster. The burned, the maimed, the dead, who knows the numbers? Shame on us, we don't know those numbers. The instability in Pakistan could easily become a nuclear issue. We have much to ponder this day. What has all this carnage bought our country? Have we forever lost the opportunity to create peace among the nations of the world? In this decade, it's been my privilege to have stood with people I come to admire. Kurdish mothers, Afghan women, Rachel Corrie's family, my dear friend Michael Berg, Catholic workers, the 9/11 Families for Peaceful Tomorrows, Quakers, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, you. People who have faith that the God of creation does not want us to destroy each other. Like you, I've tried to be a witness to the true cost of war and a witness for peace. We can't just be against war, we have to be for peace. 1,000 times I have said, bring the troops home now, take care of them when they get here, and never again go to a war based on lies. Dwight Eisenhower once said, I like to believe that people in the long run are going to do more to promote peace than our governments. Indeed, I think that people want peace so much that one of these days, governments had better get out of the way and let them have it. So I'd ask you, are we people of the long run? Can we denounce the cynicism and corruption of our leadership, overcome inequality of wealth, and dare to love our neighbors as ourselves? Many words are being spoken today. Flags will fly mournfully, names will be read, and many will weep with the never-ending sorrow of having lost a loved one before their time because of the terrible events set off on 11 September 2001. I want to offer this thought to you. It's from the ancient wisdom of Rabbi Tarfon. It's often used in the Haggadah. It is not incumbent upon you to finish the task, but neither are you free to absolve yourself from it. The effort to create peace and end violence and militarism is daunting and discouraging, and the only true power we as people wield is our power to love. And though we can never hope to finish the task of making a safe and peaceful world, nor can we ever absolve ourselves from that task. I pledge to continue that task with you, to love this world to peace. Bless you and thank you.